นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings, good evening. Many of the teachings we've inherited from the Buddha being passed down to us now for thousands of years, so necessarily many of them will be fairly general teachings, and we have to take what we can from the words of the Buddha and then apply them in our practice. And because the Buddha was teaching for a long time, 45 years, he met many people, monks and nuns, laymen, laywomen. We even say he was teaching the devas. So he taught people according to how they presented themselves to him, according to their spiritual faculties, how mature, how well developed they were in the practice. So the Buddha couldn't guarantee quite how fast people's progress would be. Again, he could talk generally and say, well, if you really practice mindfulness intently, maybe just 7 days and you'll already become enlightened. Or 7 years, or 7 lifetimes. Some people seem to practice and it all goes smoothly and easily with few obstacles, with little pain. Some people, things seem to go very slowly, and some people seem to have lots of pain and difficulty. So he would categorize Dhamma practitioners into different groups. But we practicing now, we don't have the Buddha here, so we can't go to the Buddha and say, how long is it going to take me? We have to take the words and wisdom of the Buddha and use them wisely as well. We have to develop our own wisdom and guidance from the words of the Buddha. Some things are very certain though. The factors of the Noble Eightfold Path that we know, there's 8 of them. We tend to summarize them as sila, samadhi, panya, morality, meditation and wisdom. And they all have to be cultivated, developed together, and this will result in liberation from the mental defilements. The mental defilements that human beings experience every day come up in different combinations, different strengths, but they're all rooted in greed, anger and delusion. So that much is certain. Anytime we are stressed, suffering, then greed, anger and delusion in one form or another will be at the root cause of it. But how greed, anger and delusion manifests in the mind, at what times, what triggers it, what situations lead us to experience stress and suffering, well, that will vary from person to person. Sometimes the Buddha would talk about his own practice prior to being a Buddha. So there's that story he told how in a past life he'd been a wheel maker, made the wheels for chariots, and he was a good wheel maker, so he had a good reputation. He was skilled with wood. He knew how to make a wheel that would work. So in that life, the king had to go to war, so he needed good chariots to convey himself and his troops around. So he went to the chariot wheel maker with the good reputation to get a wheel. And he said, I'll be going to war in 6 months. It takes that long to prepare for war, to get all your troops trained and all the provisions and everything ready. So he gave him 6 months. And after 6 months minus 6 days, so almost 6 months, the Bodhisattva, the Buddha to be, had made one wheel. There's only 6 days left, and the king's officer came around, can I have the wheels? He said, well, I've got one ready. He said, what? It's taken you 5 months and 24 days to make one wheel. We've only got 6 days left and we're off to war. So the Bodhisattva said, don't worry, I can do it. So he made another one in 6 days, finished. And then just before he gave them to the king's officer didn't believe that he'd done a good job. So he said, show me the wheels. And the wheel that he'd taken 5 months, 24 days to make, he just rolled it. It was so perfect, smooth, balanced. Everything was just right. He rolled it down an incline. It just kept rolling. It wouldn't stop and it wouldn't fall over. It just kept rolling very nicely on and on and on and on. And the wheel he'd made in 6 days rolled for a reasonable length of time and then fell over, as you might expect. It had more imperfections in it, more bumps and more things were out of line because he'd made it faster. Both wheels were usable, but one was very different from the other. And the Buddha later used this as a simile to say, well, if you practice, your aim is to remove all the bumps and the bends and the imperfections from your mind, meaning remove all the defilements rooted in greed, anger and delusion. And then your wheel or your mind will keep rolling in a nice, smooth, balanced way. It'll just keep going on and on and on. But you have to remove all the imperfections. If you only do it for 6 days, well, maybe you won't remove all the imperfections. You might be able to get by with your practice, but it won't. Your mind won't be completely free from defilement, won't be so well trained. Hence, the quality of patience and endurance and effort, perseverance, these are vital in the practice because you have to keep working with this mind that is still affected by greed, anger and delusion, which cause us stress in the present, it's caused us stress in the past. As long as we've still got greed, anger and delusion affecting us, well, we'll have to be stressed and suffer in the future as well. Sometimes the past, we carry it around as a heavy burden, don't we? Things that have happened in the past, you could say it's all karma rooted in past actions of greed, anger and delusion, but then gives its result, and often the result is traumatic or causes us lots of suffering, pain, physical pain, mental pain. Whether we know what the cause is or not, we might remember painful incidents, painful situations we've been through, traumatic things that have happened to us, and that can leave a strong impression on the mind. Part of that is just memory, isn't it? You can just remember things. But because we still have attachments and defilements are triggered, the memory comes up, and often we relive past experiences, or they seem to be just as intense and painful now as they were whenever they happened. So many people say as they meditate, then they have this problem where they keep experiencing pain, the pain from something that may have happened many years ago. It keeps coming up, keeps bothering them. This is why we have to practice, and we have to. Why did the Buddha say, drop the past, let the past go? So even though things do happen to us, unpleasant things, painful things, if you keep holding on, reliving them, rethinking them, reacting or letting them trigger the defilements every time you remember them, you'll keep suffering. And the way forward and the way to train is to practice being mindful enough to recognize what's going on. When the memory comes up, when the feeling is coming up, the emotion, to know that this is based on some past experience, acknowledge it and let it go. So even when the Buddha says, there are those practitioners who have quick results and everything seems to go smoothly, without difficulty, without obstacles. There's probably no one completely immune from a bit of suffering over the past, mistakes we've made or things that have happened to us. So it's something you have to learn how to deal with, isn't it? Deal with your past as it comes up. As you're meditating, training your mind, as the Buddha encouraged, developing mindfulness, keeping precepts, patient effort. Things come up, and you have to learn how to treat them wisely with mindfulness so that they don't keep creating the same suffering. In another place, the Buddha said, we have to learn how to not fall into the same old rut. The rut formed by the wheel. In the old days, all the ox carts and chariots and wagons that people used, they'd make these deep ruts in the pathways of the land. And if you're going along in an ox cart along a rut, to turn might be quite difficult because the wheel ruts are so deep. Your wheels go right down into the mud. Just to turn quickly to the right or left could be quite difficult. You might have to stop, physically move the ox, physically move the wheels to get them out of the rut. And our mind is the same. You notice this when you meditate. We have all these ruts and channels, pathways, neural pathways, habits of mind, habits of thinking, habits of reacting, that in the past we've not been mindful of, so they've just become really deeply ingrained in our consciousness, in our mind. This is part of the conditioning process that we're aiming to get out of through practice. Get out of the ruts. So to do that, we have to train. We have to be very patient, keep bringing up the mindfulness and coming back and looking and reflecting on our own mind. We also have to use some wisdom You notice how different practitioners find success with different techniques, and the more you read, the more you listen, you probably realize, everyone seems to have their own method, their own system, their own secret. That's partly because everyone has their own particular karma, their own combination of greed, anger and delusion, and how it's affected them, and their own particular pathways and ruts that they've been stuck in, and they need their own set of skillful means and practices to get out of them. So especially in the beginning, we have to accept there may be some trial and error and experimentation, and at different times we use different methods to deal with our own mind. Maybe one year you're using one thing, maybe a few years later you're using something different. And that's quite normal for Buddhist practitioners training their mind. As they develop more skill, they may move on to trying different things or using different things at different times. I remember once hearing about Venerable Sariputta, who was considered the wisest monk of all under the Buddha. And he developed samadhi walking on alms round every day. He'd cultivate the quality of metta, brahmavihara, quality of loving kindness, radiating it to all beings. So he said as he walked through the fields and forests and to the village where he could collect food, he had to develop loving kindness in all directions to all beings equally. To the people he met, some people might have been friendly, some people unfriendly, some people had faith in the Buddha, some didn't, some were well behaved, some not, some were generous and gave him food, some were not. He met animals as well, maybe even devas. But whoever he met, whatever their story, he cultivated metta, goodwill for them all. And he attained samadhi doing this. His mind became very peaceful and calm as he maintained the object of metta, walking around the villages and countryside until he got back to his own dwelling place. His aim was to keep the object of metta in mind with every step without failing. So perhaps in the beginning he had moments where he wasn't mindful. It slipped away, but over time he developed upajjhara samadhi. His mind became very still, peaceful, and that the piti and the sukha pervaded his whole body and mind as he walked. So of course, most people were very happy to meet him because he was peaceful. And he knew his own mind was free from the hindrances, free from distraction. Other monks and nuns developed their samadhi in different ways. They focused on the body, 32 parts of the body, anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Just depends who the person was. Sometimes the Buddha would give people a specific meditation object to help calm their minds. Wiping a piece of clean cloth over and over again, reciting, I'm removing defilement, I'm removing the impurity, as the monk wiped the cloth until his mind went into samadhi. Or focusing the mind on a beautiful lotus flower until it was so peaceful, just contemplating, meditating, seeing the lotus flower over and over again. Many different objects that people used. The important thing was that you have to find something that will work for you, that's something that holds your attention. And that's why occasionally there's a bit of hit and miss. You try one technique or object for a while, and then eventually you decide it's not really working for you, so you may try something new. Sometimes in the beginning you need one just to grab your attention, and then later you move on to something more refined. So many monks I know of began their meditation reciting the word Buddha and recollecting the Buddha, and then later they move on to Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. And he said in the beginning, mindfulness of breathing was difficult to practice because it's a very refined thing to follow the breath, each breath in, each breath out. The breath is so subtle. They said at the beginning, and when they were new to meditation, their mind was too coarse, not peaceful enough to do that, so they needed to recite Buddha. Lay people are the same. They have to try different objects sometimes, have to recite something or focus on a picture, all kinds of different techniques. I knew one meditator who had to focus on her painful legs because she had so much pain. She said that's all she was experiencing. So she just focused on that until the mind became calm, serene, and let go of all the hindrances. So even dukkha vedana, painful feeling, can be an object for meditation. Probably not everyone's first choice, but sometimes we can try and see. The aim is to find something that holds your attention, brings a sense of contentment, to practice with that object to bring up mindfulness. Some people find they just can't sit still or be still, so they have to do walking meditation. So many people have developed their first experience of calm samadhi just walking back and forth, back and forth. They need a bit of movement in the body because sitting still is so difficult with them, all the thoughts overwhelming them. Some people begin their meditation life in a vipassana retreat. They do body scanning, contemplating arising and falling in their body and sensations, feelings, thoughts. They spend a lot of time contemplating impermanence. And that can work as well. You have to see what the results are of what you're doing, but we're willing to be honest. Sometimes we get so attached to a technique that we're not willing to try anything else, and then we can become stale. So there's nothing wrong with a bit of experimentation. But the idea, whether you're practicing what we call samatha, just bringing the mind to one-pointedness with one object, or vipassana, contemplating the three characteristics, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. The aim is to get to the point where the five hindrances are fading out of your mind. So your attention is turned inwards, and you're not asleep, you're not dull, you're awake, you're alert, but the mind is not distracted anymore. And we all have to work with distraction, thinking too much, worrying, random thoughts, irritation, negativity, anger, and desire, ill will, desire for sense objects, sensual desire, that includes sexual desire, or just desire for things you want in life. And these are the five hindrances. We have to learn, whatever technique we're using, samatha or vipassana, how to overcome the five hindrances. And sometimes one thing is coming up stronger than another. A very common experience meditators have is they meditate for a while and become more relaxed in body and mind, and the intense thinking they had when they began meditation subsides, and then they go dull. They may even mistake that for samadhi, and they say, oh, nothing is bothering me, I don't feel much pain in the body, the mind is not thinking of anything, I must be in samadhi, but they're actually dull. It's only maybe at the end of their session when they kind of wake up or get up, then they realize they were just in this kind of blank, blurry state. Or maybe they don't even realize until someone else points it out to them, or they themselves reflect back on their own experience and they maybe ask the question, did I actually know what was going on then? And dullness is a big obstacle in meditation because body and mind become quite relaxed, so very similar to going to sleep. You need something or other, either your own intuition or wisdom, or else somebody else, just to bring you out of that dull state. Sometimes we have to test ourselves, check ourselves out. So you open your eyes, take some deep breaths, or you change your object just to check whether you're really there. Are you really with it? Are you present or not? Sometimes dullness comes about, is fed by a wrong view. Like sometimes we say, I shouldn't have any desires in my mind. All desire is the cause of attachment and suffering, so I should have no desire. It's quite a common view, especially in the beginning of meditation. But then if you have no desire at all, what's making you meditate? You actually need some desire. So the Buddha pointed out, well, there's what we call wholesome desire and unwholesome desire. Unwholesome desire we usually call tanha or craving, and results in suffering of one kind or another. Agitation, discontent, can be unwholesome desire in the form of negativity, aversion, ill will, or could be in the form more of greed and wanting things. Either way, your mind is discontent and agitated, not peaceful, not settled, and there's no samadhi. But wholesome desire is focused on the practice, brings you back to the object of your meditation. If you're practicing, say, with the breath, for example, it's the wholesome desire to establish awareness on the breath, to know each breath in, each breath out as part of the Buddhist path, and to do that well, to bring it to success, to completion. So wholesome desire is not seeking any particular reward, or say, I need to be peaceful, I want bliss, I want this, I want that. I want to be a good meditator, I want praise, I want nothing bothering me, all the kind of different results we might wish for actually tend to trigger craving rather than wholesome desire, what we call chanda. Wholesome desire is just bringing us back to the practice of the meditation, what we're supposed to be doing. It's like going back to reading the instructions again. I should be with the breath, go back to the breath. One breath in, one breath out, and so you don't actually need to focus beyond that into what's going to happen later on in a while. If my mind becomes peaceful, what will I do then? Again, that's another kind of craving. It's just bringing us back to the task in hand, or even just noticing impermanence, Wholesome desire can lead us to focus on the arising and ceasing of thoughts. Where you're not wanting or craving anything more than that. You're just knowing thoughts arising, passing away, and trying to maintain that knowing, that quality of knowing. So cultivating what we call kusala chanda, wholesome desire, is one way out of dullness. It's like prompting yourself, nudging yourself to check whether your mind is truly alert, truly mindful, or even giving yourself something to do, but contemplating the body, for example. So many people have become enlightened contemplating the 32 parts of the body, the 4 elements, or contemplating their body as a corpse. If you're dull, just imagine yourself as a corpse. That might wake you up. It may bring some fear or anxiety with it, so everything has to be done in a balanced way, but that can bring you out of dullness. Or contemplate death. If I was to die tonight, what would happen? What does that mean for me if I was to die? Or actually seeing yourself, visualizing yourself as a corpse. There's 10 corpse meditations. There's plenty of scope for the imagination and to give yourself some work. If you're caught into dullness, what if I died, what would I look like on the first day? What would this body look like on the first day? Lying there, you assume you will be lying there. You don't really know. If I was lying there, what colour changes would the skin go through? What would happen to my eyes, the skin? How long before there'd be strange coloration? Smelly, corpses always smell. How long before the strong smell comes? If you go right through it, what happens to a corpse later on? It starts to become bloated, bursts open, so you get weeping, you get liquids and pus and different kinds of liquids coming out of the corpse. Eventually it starts to dry out, and you see the bones more, and then the rest of the corpse, the organs and the flesh starts to disappear. Eventually you've just got bones, skeleton. Everyone in the world has a skeleton, otherwise we wouldn't be able to walk around. We'd just collapse on the ground if we didn't have a skeleton. So a skeleton is the most normal thing for a human being. So of course this meditation will bring up some discomfort in the mind, which is why people don't want to do it very much. But experiment. If you are caught into dullness, sleepiness, try it. It may bring you out. Many people have brought themselves to a state of full alertness, woken themselves up, brightened the mind by contemplating their own body as a corpse. You can take it right through to completion. Seeing the bones, even the bones gradually disappear, fade away into earth and dust. And then they're gone. And this body just disappears back into the elements. That sense of it being a person, a being, disappears too. When people were not ready for that, the Buddha would give them these more straightforward objects, so like rubbing the cloth. Venerable Chula Pandaka is just rubbing this white piece of cloth, contemplating impermanence, saying the words, rubbing away the impurities. And as he rubbed, the cloth itself got dirtier. Because your hands, your fingers have sweat, grease, so the cloth got gradually dirtier, and then he contemplated back to his own body and mind and saw how his own body and mind was impermanent, changes. Then he became enlightened. the one contemplating the lotus, by just natural, as the mind focused down on the lotus, the very beautiful, radiant lotus, couldn't help but come to the realization that one day this lotus will fade, just like flowers on the shrine. They start off beautiful, fresh, fragrant, looking good, full of colour, and then gradually they wither and fade. The smell turns to something unpleasant. They become dry, dark, mouldy, or imperfect in one way or another, and they wither and drop. So the one focusing on the lotus came to see the impermanence of a lotus and then contemplated back, reflected back on their own body. So sometimes we have to do it that way. You start with something beautiful and attractive to hold attention, and then introduce the idea of impermanence or asupa, unattractiveness. If you're a thinker, you can do it with thought as well. You think the most interesting, attractive, mind-gripping thought. Could be a theory, somebody else's theory that you've just understood, some beautiful poetry, a story, whatever. You bring up really a thought or a train of thought, a series of thoughts that holds your attention, and then introduce, simply by watching and observing, the fact that the most beautiful thought in the world arises, ceases and disappears back into emptiness. And you can't hold it all the time. Even the thought, say a word like the Buddha, you might have great faith and recite the word Buddha or Dhammo or Sangho. Eventually the word is so course, you become clear that the mind doesn't need to hold on to the word anymore, and just has, what it's left with is the knowing, the quality of mindfulness and knowing. Drops the word. Teaches you the impermanence of thought and words. Eventually all words end. They arise, they cease. Feeling as well. Pleasure and pain is constantly arising and ceasing. If you focus down on pleasure and pain, gradually you become more and more aware of the impermanence. The most painful feeling still arises and passes away. The most pleasant, blissful feeling still arises and passes away. The idea is, however much it takes to develop mindfulness and then samadhi, and then use that to focus in on any aspect of body or mind, to see the true nature that this body and mind is constantly changing, subject to change. So then you have no more doubts. So wherever you look, the physical form, the mental form, what we call nama and rupa, there's nothing that is lasting, completely satisfying, or that I can hold on to as a self. Because if it's impermanent, it can't be a self that you can identify with and make yours, because it's always changing. So we have to experiment a bit with methods to calm the mind, to hold our attention, and then ways to develop insight into these three characteristics. One person's way may not be exactly the same as another person's. Ajahn Chah used to say some of his best insights came from outside the textbooks. And we all know how good he was at describing the mind and how defilements defile the mind and cause suffering, but also how insight sees through defilement and helps us to let them go. He's very good at doing that, and partly because he's very creative and observant of the human mind. So he said sometimes your insight comes from outside the textbooks. It's not something you'll have read in a sutta or in a talk from someone else. Just your own observation in a situation. You see your own emotion arise, pass away, and you say, oh, it's gone. When it arose, it was very unpleasant, difficult. When it's gone, it's gone. Or it's very pleasurable, exciting, pleasurable, stimulating. But once it's gone, it's gone. And it's the seeing of the arising and then the passing of experience that is where insight comes. Because we get caught into these ruts of the mind, these different channels of thinking, habits of thinking and reacting, behaving, we do have to be willing to try new things and look at our own experience from different angles. Even just getting yourself to meditate is already a big part of that. The hardest part of meditation is just starting, just beginning. Most of the time we're just running along through life because we all say life is so busy, got to do this, do that. We're not really watching our mind, so we don't notice where these different defilements are triggered, so then suddenly we're angry or worried or bored and we don't know where it's come from. If you're willing to train a bit more in mindfulness and practice some meditation every day, well, your level of mindfulness will become better. You'll notice things more clearly, you'll see things more clearly. You have to clear away some of the mental activity that we're sort of just constantly moving from object to object, thought to thought, story to story, reaction to reaction. That's how they describe an unenlightened person. We're all aiming for enlightenment with this practice. But the Buddha said an unenlightened person is thick with defilements. They're spread thickly, like when you spread peanut butter on a piece of bread, you spread it thickly, you can't see the bread. The unenlightened person, you can't see the radiance and the peace of the mind yet because there's so many defilements, so thick, layer upon layer of me, mine, myself, my mood, my thought, my greed, my anger, my delusion, my suffering. It's so thick that we have to learn how to part it. Part the thickness of the greed, anger and delusion through developing this path, sila, samadhi, panya. And keep doing it. Maybe at first you just get little holes if you got a spoon and you stuck it into the peanut butter on your piece of bread, well, you might see the bread if you use the spoon to clear away some of that thick covering. It's like when you meditate, you have a few moments of mindfulness and the thickness of your mood and your endless thinking sort of separates enough for you to realize or believe there is something underneath. There is a mind that can be peaceful, radiant, happy. I'm just going to have to keep working at it, clear away the thickness, or thin out the defilements. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.